All eyes were on the CAF Congress in Cairo this week, and today we take a look at its outcomes. The vote on the host nation for AFCON 2017, the draw for the qualifiers, and the removal of the age limit for officials drawing the most interest. We will also talk about how Nigerian and South African clubs have crashed out of the CAF Champions League. They say the art of conversation is to talk about the right thing at the right time, and this is the right place. You're watching The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation. I'm Ehi Alonge, and in the studio with me today is Carlos Salvador, Media Management Consultant. Hello, Carlos, how are you?
Hi, Ehi. Very well, thanks.
Good to have you with us. And joining us on Skype from Addis Ababa is African football correspondent Durosimi Thomas. Duro, how are you?
Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. Right, well, let's start then. Gabon won a three-country contest against Algeria and Ghana on Wednesday to host the 2017 Africa Cup of Nations football tournament, ending the long wait to find out who would host the next edition of the biennial African football showpiece. Now, post-Gaddafi-era violence in Libya saw 2017 host South Africa stepping in to stage AFCON 2013, and as the deadly Libyan unrest has intensified, the 2017 hosts have changed as well. Here's how the Gabon FA has reacted to the news.
Gabon has already organised an Africa Cup of Nations in 2012, but as co-organiser with Equatorial Guinea, so in a way it was only half a cup. But now we have it entirely to ourselves, and Gabon is ready. We have 4 selected cities, and all 4 of them are ready, and will be ready to host the African Cup of Nations in 2017.
A mixture of some statements there from the Gabon president, or the FA president, shall I clarify, and some tweets there explaining. Actually, Duro, I want to come to you first. Now, only half a cup. I mean, that's quite a funny way of putting it, but I do get his point in that Gabon have never entirely hosted the tournament by themselves before. But is there any controversy about the selection, given that both they and Ghana actually have been recent hosts?
Well, yeah, there is kind of like a principle. It's not a rule, but it's like when CAF previously decided the host nation, they look at where the tournament has been before. So if a North African country has hosted it before, they want to give chance to other regions. But it has happened recently that sometimes some of the other regions are not ready. So you find out like 10 years ago, in 2004 and 2006, it was in Tunisia and Egypt. And then it's going to West Africa in Ghana, and then, Angola follows. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I think this time it's like almost like a really long period that it's going to be in Central Africa. So 2012, Gabon, again, like you said, AFE tournament in 2012 with Equatorial Guinea. And only South Africa in 2013 came in between these hosting. So then we found out that in 2015, by accident, or let's not say by accident, but by fate, it came back to Equatorial Guinea because Morocco, who we are due to host it this year, didn't. And so now it's going back to Central Africa with Gabon. But then in 2019, it's going to be in Cameroon. And so I think that's why it's being called into question, but it's not a hard and fast rule.
Okay, what I'm going to do, actually, I want to put this to you because on Twitter, put this to you, Carlos, so I should specify. On Twitter yesterday, we saw 1 or 2 questions about the process itself as to whether it's open enough. And I know that it's probably caught up in a lot of other political machinations. But what we did get the impression was that to the man on the street in Ghana, it probably wasn't that big a deal. Home advantage, surely they would have wanted that. I mean, they've had one go at it before. Do you see home advantage as being something they should have really gone for?
I would imagine that Ghanaian fans would want to see a home nations, African nation for them. It's been 25 years. They've been looking to win the cup. So to bring the team home and try and do it on home soil, I think any nation in the world would look for that. What I find bizarre about this whole situation is that, Gabon was even in the running. I know that Ghana had hosted in 2008, but when you look at Algeria, they haven't hosted since 1990. So in reality, maybe it should have just been between the two of them. The biggest situation, as you've mentioned, is, the clarity in terms of how the voting process happens. And again, with CAF, there seems to be an issue in terms of the governance of that voting.
Actually, on that point, Duro, I want to ask you, with your knowledge of how CAF works and its processes, now, there was a member of the Ghanaian bid team who, on Ghanaian radio yesterday, and must qualify that these were merely allegations, suggested that there was some displeasure with the process. It should have been more open. The media was entitled to know who'd voted for whom. And in fact, that this member of the Ghanaian bid team went as far as to suggest that he was expecting maybe the Algerians to protest. Now, from your perspective and understanding what happened yesterday and also what CAF's processes are like, is this an accurate reflection of what should have happened?
Well, I think the Ghanaians should, first of all, look back to how they won the bid in 2008. They were not so much, with some heavy contenders. I can't remember who they were, but they won it. But I don't think anybody asked, say, okay, how did you guys win it to host in 2008? Algeria have lost the bid many times. They've never protested. I think the reason is why everybody is crying is because with the three bids, Gabon is the weakest. And so everybody's trying to find out why. How can you give the cup to somebody who has just two cities, probably three stadia already, but they might have to do a lot of work compared to Ghana and Algeria. So, but first of all, just to say that it is the executive committee of CAF that decides, and this is done in secret. That's the way it's been for many years. And even Ghana, they also have a member, well, the FA president of Ghana is a member of the CAF executive committee. So he himself has the right to vote. So I think it's just to answer the question of why Gabon, and once people understand the trend, the politics of the football itself, that is beyond infrastructure and readiness and any other thing else, then they'll get the answer.
Okay, well, what we're going to pick up after the break is some of that infrastructure and challenges, but this time looking at CAF itself, where they've removed the age limit on officials. We'll pick up on that after the break. Welcome back to the conversation. The CAF Congress has also voted to remove the age limit on officials, paving the way for Hayatu to remain on as president. Let's see what the people have had to say about that. It'll be fair to say the reaction across the Twitterverse has been kind of unexpected. There's some jokes there about the typical trend in African institutions of leaving the big man in place until perhaps too late. But overall, I think more of the serious comments have been looking at potential effects now that CAF is more in line with FIFA, and what we'll be looking to do is discuss some of the similarities that we'll see both in how CAF and FIFA intend to move forward. Well, Carlos, I'm going to start with you. We saw some funny tweets there comparing him to Mugabe and everything else. But in simple terms, FIFA have this in place, and we see that Blatter is likely to benefit from that. CAF now have this the removal of the age restriction also in place. Yeah. Do you see it as is that a good thing or a bad thing for African football?
I think it's neither. I think the fact that CAF is in line with FIFA, which is governing world football, makes sense anyway. I think that the whole issue here that we should be looking at is the governance of football and whether guys such as Issa Hayatu and Sepp Blatter should be in those positions for so many terms. Sepp Blatter will be going for his 5th term. So Issa Hayatou now will be going in till 2017. He's been in that position, I think, since 1988. So when you look at the governance of football, how can something so great to the world be led by one or two men for such a long time? And that's the key issue for me.
Okay, Duro, fair point there from Carlos, but let me ask you, time for change?
If it's good, why change it? I'm not saying everything about CAF has been great. They've made mistakes over the years, but if you look at somebody like Hayatou, who came into office, I think probably at the age of 46 back in 1988, he was replacing somebody who was a little bit older than himself, maybe a 20-year gap in Nekatu Tesema of Ethiopia. Nekatu Tesema is like a library, it's like an encyclopedia, and Hayatou schooled from this kind of people. Mohamed Alim Salim from Sudan. These are the guys who formed CAF back in 1956. Now, if you take at the example of what happened when Morocco refused to stage the Nations Cup, and Hayatou was able to run around, in Africa, we have our village chiefs. There's a problem, and the chief, because of his time with the elders, he's been able to resolve problems, and he did that role. I don't think most of the other young guys would have done the same. I'm not saying it would be impossible. I'm just saying his address book and his experience was so great that this kind of problem was solved, and the Nations Cup for the first time was hosted with a 2 months notice.
Well, let me jump in there, Duro, because Carlos looks like he'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, obviously you need to have the right credentials to be in a position such as president of CAF or FIFA. The question for me isn't that we bring in young people, but there are other people out there in the world of business, in the world of sport, who have done a lot of work, have a lot of experience, and therefore governance should be changed every so often just to make sure that things are evolving.
How do you respond to that, Duro?
It's kind of like, it's like a political correctness in this age of, democracy, and, we should change people, everybody is going, But I think in Africa, Africa should accept its own reality and should be allowed to, govern itself the way it chooses, not to choose because somebody has been in office for 2-3 times, and so it should go out. If Hayatou is unsuitable, I have a good feeling that he will be out.
Well, on that point, there are other strictures in place apart from the age limit removal. I mean, to replace Hayatou, you'd have had to work for Hayatou essentially in the EXCO, which by very definition means you'd be a Hayatou person. Let's just clarify, we're not saying Hayatou has to leave, but to pick up Carlos's point, which I'd really like you to address, I mean, you're not saying it's good or bad, but shouldn't there be an opportunity for talents to emerge just as it would do on the pitch? So if you have good commercially minded people right across the continent, just the same way as Blatter has faced off other challenges and is currently facing challenges who have some merit, do you think that a system where you have to serve on the EXCO and Hayatou is likely to be in place until he chooses to leave, not actually be replaced by somebody who's better or more energy or more aware of the opportunities in future? Where does the balance lie?
Well, first of all, let's look at some of the members in the executive committee. I think one of the youngest is the FA president of Ghana, Kwesi Nyanchechi. I think he's probably, I'm not even sure he's yet 50. Probably is now about, very close to 50 or just about 50 years of age. Let's look at the commercial interest that we are, referencing to now. Glow, owned by, Nigerian money, Nigerian entrepreneur. They are sponsoring the African Football of the Year awards. So these people believe in the system in place, not necessarily, but they work with CAF to promote African football. So I think all those opportunities are there. What I think has happened is if Hayatou is in place, there are other people who can be given a chance. They could still come. I don't think Hayatou is saying nobody should replace him, but I'm sure that he is fighting as well to develop African football in a way. Again, like I'm saying, this Equatorial Guinea issue when Morocco refused is kind of like the big way. If Hayatou was 60 or even 55...
Duro, I mean, we're assuming that nobody else. The reason why I don't want to stick on that is because then it seems that nobody else could have resolved it. Somebody else, perhaps younger, perhaps older, might have resolved it. But Carlos would like to jump in.
I think the issue here that you've mentioned a few times, Durosimi, is that somebody else should be given an opportunity. But the thing about governance is that it's not an issue where you wait for an opportunity. It should be within the structure that every so often there needs to be change. I think one of the points that you mentioned is that Africa needs to govern itself. And that is correct, but I do believe that there are many people within Africa that can govern African football, and that should be changing just to make every so often years, just to make sure that there is change happening and that new direction is being led.
Okay, guys, we could talk about governance in Africa in many different guises all day, but we're going to go into the club stuff now and look at how Nigeria and South African clubs have underperformed in CAF Champions League. Welcome back to the conversation. Now we're going to look at some on-pitch activity now, where Nigeria and South African clubs have crashed out of the early rounds of the CAF Champions League. Before we look into the whys and wherefores, let's look at what the Twitterverse has to say about this. Okay, we're looking across the fan reaction. It looks like most people, especially South African fans, were pretty much sanguine about how their clubs performed, apart from at Yes We Crown there being very honest and very direct about the problems. But what we really want to know and what we'll be looking at after this segment finishes is how much time and how much money is needed for these clubs to start performing at the level they're expected to. Okay, so fans of football across the continent, you'd have been inundated with football results this weekend, looking at what was going on in the CAF Champions League, CAF Confederations Cup. And one thing that might have struck you is that across the board, Nigerian clubs and ABSA Premiership clubs did not perform. Now, both leagues are very different positions in the continent, but I want to come to you first, Carlos. You're a football coach, you understand the motivations day-to-day of players. What could be behind the non-performance? Specifically, let's start with Nigeria then. What would you put the non-performance of their clubs down to?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you got to look at with Nigeria is a lot of young talent leave Nigeria very quickly. And when we looked at some of the performances within the Champions League, if we look at Raja Casablanca, they have a Nigerian scoring 2 goals for them in the Champions League. So there are far many Nigerian players playing on the African continent outside of Nigeria, as well as in Europe. And therefore, perhaps the clubs within Nigeria who are playing in the African Champions League haven't got the best crop of Nigerian players. That, I would think, has something to do with that.
Duro, do you agree with that point? The best Nigerian players are playing elsewhere, and that might be the key reason why they haven't performed on the continent so far this season.
It could be. I mean, added to that is the fact that there is some amount of resources that needs to be put into these clubs. The last club that won the Champions League from Nigeria, for example, is Enyimba, and that was because there was a very powerful chairman who put in money, especially from the states that Enyimba are based, ABBA, and they mobilized and even they brought in internationals from Ghana, from Benin at that time, and they won the competition twice in a row. So I think they just need that. And exactly that was the problem why a club like Dolphins, who stranded on their way to Tunis and could not even, play that game, and then they ended up being disqualified. And even, I think, Warri Wolves now, they also not even they were trying to raise money before the second leg of the game. So I think these resources added to the exodus of players, which has been there. But Nigeria, on the whole, is a really deep pool of talent. It's like Brazilians leave Brazil all the time, but still Brazil is strong. Well, I hope, because, they lost 7-1 to
Well,
Germany.
we all watched the World Cup semi-final.
Yeah.
Exactly. But actually,
Exactly.
the question of money, I think, and just to use the topic of money to move into the ABSA Premiership. Now, the CAF Champions League is the second best paying tournament for clubs on the continent. The best paying tournament is the ABSA Premiership in South Africa. Could it be possible, and I'll start with you, Carlos, could it be possible that actually, generally, I mean, we saw a case where away matches for teams playing against South African teams tended to be in empty stadiums, but wherever South African clubs traveled to, home fans had packed out the stadium, it was an event. Could it just be that South African clubs and the South African football family fraternity don't see the CAF Champions League as, they see it a bit as a junior competition, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Premier League in England and the way that's marketed and the fact that every team really wants to win it. And you look at some of the other competition like your Carling Cup or your Capital One Cups. And some teams, depending on where they are in the league, will take it very importantly. And some teams won't. And I think when you are part of a Premier League, the ABSA Premier League, which has the most amount of money, we can't say for sure that clubs aren't looking at the African Champions League as a second competition.
Duro, do you think that'd be a fair charge to level at ABSA Premiership clubs, that maybe they don't take CAF Champions League seriously?
I think you're right. I think we have to be honest about it. South Africa was closed for many years due to apartheid. And even I had the experience when I was there for the Nations Cup in 1996. And I said, I want to make a phone call to Sierra Leone. And, it became a problem because, we have to find where that place is. So without blaming them a lot, there is a disconnect between what's happening in South African football and what's happening in the rest of Africa. There is a big connect, however, with what's happening in Europe, interestingly. So that disconnect needs to be solved between a South African club and their fans. They need to understand what it means competing in African competitions.
Let me just say, you make a point about Europe there. Is there any chance from the both of you, do you think that with a number of European clubs who have set up farm teams in the ABSA Premiership, that perhaps that's also not helping South Africa feel connected on the club scene to what's happening in Europe, and rather they'd look at Bloemfontein, Celtic, Ajax, and what have you?
Personally, no. I think it's for every club to set up their own vision and their own strategies. And to blame outside influences in Europe or the rest of the world for influencing that, I think would be the wrong thing. I think clubs need to take, an in-house approach to things. And you're on the continent of Africa. If it's important to you, you'll make sure that you show that.
Giro, do you think it might have an effect? All these farm systems they've got with European clubs, maybe helping to distract them from what could be a marvelous opportunity to dominate on the continent?
I mean, it's all over Africa. Even let's not just say it's a South African syndrome. I mean, even in Ghana, you have clubs calling themselves Beokum Chelsea, something Arsenal, something DC United. So this is a very serious problem. So like Carlos is saying, the clubs need to, I mean, many years ago, Pele of Brazil came to Africa. It's not new for clubs outside influences to be coming. So yes, Carlos is definitely right. So it's like the clubs back home on the continent needs to say, what are they existing for? They need to ask themselves that question rather than imitating and then expecting outside help. Because at the end of the day, that's what's causing that empty stadiums in South African league matches.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, as ever on this show, there's so much more we could talk about, but there's not enough time. So why don't you follow us on Twitter and Facebook and post your own opinions and queries. Meanwhile, Carlos, thank you for joining us in the studio.
You, Ehi.
And Giro, I hope to catch up with you someday soon, but enjoy Addis Ababa. We'll see you soon.